"You're nothing but a basement dweller who got lucky," she hissed, her manicured finger pointing directly at my chest as the entire family gathering fell silent around us. The crystal chandelier above cast harsh shadows across Rebecca's perfectly contoured face, her designer dress catching the light as she delivered what she clearly believed would be my social execution. Little did she know that her own husband, standing just 10 feet away with a champagne flute frozen halfway to his lips, was about to shatter her carefully constructed narrative with two simple words that would change everything. "I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." The confrontation had been building for 3 years, ever since I'd married her younger brother Marcus and moved into what she dismissively called that little house in the suburbs. But tonight, at the elegant Crawford family reunion in their sprawling Napa Valley estate, Rebecca Morrison had finally decided to make her feelings public. What she didn't know was that the quiet, unassuming woman she'd been belittling had just finished a 16-hour surgery saving a child's life before catching the red-eye flight to be here. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, though for the past 3 years the Crawford family has known me simply as Marcus's wife, who works nights and keeps odd hours. I'm 34 years old, a pediatric neurosurgeon at Children's Hospital of San Francisco, and until this moment, I had carefully maintained the privacy that my profession demanded. The decision to keep my career details vague hadn't been about deception, it had been about protection, both for my patients' confidentiality and for my own sanity in navigating the complex social dynamics of Marcus's prominent Bay Area family. The Crawford family had built their reputation over 4 generations in Northern California's wine country. Marcus's great-grandfather had established Crawford Vineyards in 1924, and through careful expansion and strategic partnerships, they had become one of the region's most respected wine-producing families. The family estate, a sprawling Mediterranean-style villa overlooking endless rows of perfectly manicured grapevines, had been featured in Architectural Digest and served as the backdrop for countless society events. Rebecca Morrison, née Crawford, had appointed herself the guardian of the family's social standing. At 38, she possessed the kind of polished confidence that came from never having to question her place in the world. Married to investment banker Thomas Morrison, she divided her time between charity galas, wine country society events, and what she called curating the Crawford legacy. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, her wardrobe consisted entirely of designer pieces, and her social media presence carefully documented a life of enviable luxury. Marcus, 2 years younger than his sister, had taken a different path. After completing his MBA at Stanford, he'd chosen to work as a nonprofit administrator for an organization that provided educational resources to underserved communities. His salary was modest compared to family expectations, but his work gave him a sense of purpose that money couldn't provide. It was this genuine commitment to service that had first attracted me to him when we met at a medical conference where he was presenting on healthcare access in rural communities. Our courtship had been unconventional by Crawford family standards. Instead of expensive restaurants and society events, Marcus and I had found connection in quiet conversations over coffee between my shifts, walks along the beach when my schedule allowed, and shared meals in my small apartment near the hospital. He knew I was a doctor, that much I'd shared immediately, but the specifics of my specialization and the intensity of my work remained details we rarely discussed. Our relationship was built on who we were as people, not what we did for a living. The decision to keep my career specifics private when meeting his family hadn't been calculated, it had simply evolved naturally. When Rebecca asked what I did, I'd mentioned working in healthcare, which technically wasn't false. When she pressed for details, Marcus had smoothly redirected the conversation, sensing my reluctance to elaborate. Over time, this vagueness had apparently led Rebecca to construct her own narrative about my profession, and by extension, my worthiness to be part of the Crawford family. The basement dweller comment had its origins in an unfortunate misunderstanding 6 months earlier. Rebecca had stopped by our house unannounced one Tuesday afternoon, letting herself in with the spare key Marcus had given her for emergencies. She'd found me in our finished basement, which I'd converted into a home office and study space. I'd been hunched over medical journals and surgical texts, preparing for a particularly complex case involving a 7-year-old with a rare spinal tumor. To Rebecca's eyes, the scene had apparently confirmed her worst suspicions: piles of what she assumed were random books, multiple computer monitors displaying what looked like incomprehensible diagrams, and me in my typical off-duty uniform of yoga pants and an oversized Stanford medical sweatshirt. She'd made some comment about finally understanding where I spend my time, and I'd been too focused on my case preparation to correct her assumptions. The basement setup was actually a necessity of my profession. Pediatric neurosurgery required constant study, continuous education, and meticulous preparation for each case. The basement provided the quiet, controlled environment I needed to review surgical videos, study anatomical models, and consult with colleagues around the world via video conference. The multiple monitors allowed me to compare MRI scans, review surgical approaches, and stay current with the latest research in my field. But Rebecca had seen only what her preconceptions allowed her to see, a woman she'd never considered worthy of her family, apparently confirmed in her unsuitability by what appeared to be an antisocial lifestyle of hiding in basements with stacks of books. The narrative fit perfectly with her existing doubts about Marcus's choice in partners. The truth was that my schedule made traditional social engagement challenging. Pediatric neurosurgery isn't a 9-to-5 profession. Emergency calls could come at any hour, surgeries could extend for 12 or 16 hours, and the emotional weight of working with critically ill children required careful management of my time and energy. I attended Crawford family events when possible, but I often arrived tired, left early for calls, or missed gatherings entirely due to surgical emergencies. Marcus understood and supported my career completely, but he'd also grown up in a family where social presence and availability were considered markers of commitment and respect. Rebecca had interpreted my absences and quiet demeanor as disinterest in the family, or worse, as evidence that I felt superior to their gatherings. The reality that I was often exhausted from trying to save children's lives hadn't occurred to her. The Crawford family reunion that would change everything had been planned for months. Marcus's parents, David and Linda Crawford, were celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary, and the entire extended family had gathered at the estate for a weekend of festivities. Cousins had flown in from across the country, childhood friends had been invited, and the guest list read like a who's who of Northern California society. I'd almost missed the reunion entirely. The night before, I'd been called in for an emergency surgery involving an 8-year-old boy named Jamie, who'd been in a serious car accident. The trauma had caused severe swelling in his brain, and without immediate intervention, he would have suffered permanent damage or death. The surgery had been incredibly complex, requiring me to work with a team of specialists to carefully remove blood clots and reduce the pressure on his brain tissue. 16 hours later, as Jamie was wheeled into recovery with a positive prognosis, I'd realized I had less than 3 hours to catch my flight to San Francisco. I'd gone home, showered, thrown clothes into a bag, and made it to the airport with minutes to spare. The entire flight I'd been running on adrenaline and professional satisfaction. Jamie was going to recover fully, able to return to his third-grade class and his passion for soccer. When I arrived at the Crawford estate, the anniversary celebration was already in full swing. The main terrace had been transformed into an elegant party space with white linens, cascading flowers and soft lighting that made the vineyard landscape look like something from a fairy tale. Guests mingled with champagne flutes, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the Crawford wines being served. Marcus found me immediately, his face lighting up with the relief of someone who'd been worried I might not make it at all. "You look exhausted," he said, wrapping me in a gentle hug. "Long night." "Very long," I confirmed, not elaborating on the details. "But successful. I'm glad I could make it." He studied my face with the concern that made me love him. "Are you sure you're up for this? You could rest for a while if you need to." But I'd missed too many family events already, and this was a significant milestone for his parents. "I'll be fine," I assured him. "Besides, your mom specifically asked me to be here for the toast." What I didn't realize was that Rebecca had been watching our exchange from across the terrace, her expression growing darker as she observed what she interpreted as Marcus coddling his antisocial wife. In her mind, my late arrival and tired appearance were further evidence of my disrespect for the family and my unsuitability as a Crawford daughter-in-law. The evening had proceeded pleasantly enough at first. I'd made conversation with various family members, complimented Linda on the beautiful setup, and done my best to be present despite the exhaustion weighing on my shoulders. David Crawford, Marcus's father, had been particularly kind, asking about my work with genuine interest, though I'd kept my responses general as always. "Healthcare is such important work," he said warmly. "We're grateful to have someone in the family who's dedicated to helping others." Rebecca had been within earshot of this exchange, and I'd noticed her jaw tighten slightly. Later, I'd overheard her speaking with her husband Thomas in what she probably thought was a private corner of the terrace. She barely contributes to conversations, Rebecca had been saying, her voice carrying more than she realized. Always tired, always making excuses to leave early. I don't understand what Marcus sees in her. Thomas, to his credit, had tried to moderate his wife's criticism. Maybe she works more demanding hours than we realize. Becca, healthcare can be pretty intensive. Please, Rebecca had scoffed. How demanding can filing paperwork or answering phones really be? She's probably just a receptionist or something equally mundane, and she's embarrassed to admit it. The conversation had stung, but I'd chosen not to address it directly. Confrontation wouldn't serve anyone, and explaining my actual role would only complicate the careful balance I'd maintained. Instead, I'd focused on enjoying the celebration and supporting Marcus during this important family gathering. The moment that would change everything began during the formal toasts. David Crawford had asked for everyone's attention, speaking movingly about 40 years of marriage, family legacy, and the joy of watching his children build their own lives. Linda had followed with her own words about love, commitment, and the expanded family that now included spouses and grandchildren. Then Marcus had surprised everyone by asking for the microphone. I wanted to say something about finding the right partner, he'd begun, his eyes finding mine in the crowd. 3 years ago, I met someone who changed my understanding of what it means to be dedicated to something larger than yourself. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Rebecca's expression had shifted to barely concealed annoyance as Marcus continued. Sarah works harder than anyone I know, often sacrificing her own comfort to help others. She's taught me about real commitment, about putting service above personal convenience. It was then that Rebecca had apparently reached her breaking point. As Marcus returned the microphone to his father and the guests began to disperse back into smaller conversation groups, she'd made her way directly to where I stood near the terrace railing. "We need to talk," she'd announced, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby guests. The conversation that followed had been a masterclass in controlled hostility. Rebecca had begun with what appeared to be polite small talk, asking about my work and my schedule, but her questions had carried an undercurrent of interrogation that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "It must be nice to have such a flexible schedule," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All those late mornings and early evenings at home." "My schedule is actually quite unpredictable," I'd replied calmly, unwilling to rise to the bait, but also unwilling to let the implication stand unchallenged. "Of course it is," Rebecca had agreed with false sympathy. "I imagine it's hard to maintain regular hours when you're working from home so much. What will you do again, exactly?" The question had been posed loudly enough that a growing circle of family members had begun to gather, sensing the tension in the exchange. Marcus had started moving in our direction, but he'd been intercepted by his uncle asking about his nonprofit work. "I work in healthcare," I'd repeated, the same vague answer I'd always given. "Yes, but what specifically?" Rebecca had pressed, her voice growing sharper. "Surely after 3 years of marriage we can move beyond these mysterious non-answers about your career." The crowd around us had grown larger, and I'd felt the weight of expectant gazes. This was clearly Rebecca's moment to expose what she believed was my fundamental dishonesty about my place in the family hierarchy. "Healthcare covers a lot of territory," she'd continued when I didn't immediately elaborate. "Are you a nurse? A technician? An administrator?" Each suggestion had been delivered with increasing condescension, as if she were helping me find a more acceptable way to describe a fundamentally modest profession. It was then that Thomas Morrison had appeared at his wife's shoulder, having noticed the gathering crowd and the rising tension in her voice, but instead of diffusing the situation as I'd hoped, his presence had seemed to embolden Rebecca to make her final devastating pronouncement. "You know what, Sarah?" she'd said, her voice carrying across the now silent terrace. "I think I've figured out what your problem is. You're nothing but a basement dweller who got lucky when my brother took pity on you. You hide away from real social interaction, you contribute nothing meaningful to family conversations, and you've somehow convinced Marcus that your antisocial behavior is actually dedication to work." The words had hung in the air like a physical blow, and I'd felt the collective intake of breath from the gathered guests. Someone's champagne glass had actually slipped from their fingers, shattering against the stone terrace with a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. That was when Thomas Morrison, Rebecca's own husband, had looked directly at me with an expression of dawning horror as he realized what his wife had just done. His face had gone pale, and his hand had moved to his wife's arm as if to physically restrain her from saying anything else. "Rebecca," he'd said quietly, his voice carrying a warning that she was too caught up in her triumphant moment to heed. "You need to stop talking, right now." But Rebecca had been beyond stopping. She'd interpreted her husband's intervention as support for her position, and she'd pressed forward with her verbal assault. "No, Thomas, someone needs to say this. Marcus deserves better than someone who can't even be honest about what she does for a living. Look at her. She can't even defend herself because she knows I'm right." And that was when Thomas Morrison, investment banker and Harvard Business School graduate, had looked around at the circle of stunned faces, then back at his wife, and delivered the two words that would change everything. "She's a surgeon." The two words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "She's a surgeon." Thomas Morrison's voice carried across the silent terrace with the weight of absolute certainty, and I watched as every face in the gathered crowd turned toward me with expressions ranging from shock to confusion to dawning comprehension. Rebecca's mouth had fallen open, her champagne flute trembling in her hand as she stared at her husband in complete bewilderment. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, but her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear in the profound silence that had settled over the anniversary celebration. Thomas looked directly at me, his expression a mixture of apology and urgent concern. "Dr. Sarah Chen," he said, using my full professional title for the first time in 3 years. "Pediatric neurosurgeon at Children's Hospital of San Francisco, one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history." The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Gasps rippled through the gathering as family members who had politely tolerated what they assumed was Marcus's modest wife suddenly recalibrated their understanding of who I actually was. Cousin Jennifer, who had barely spoken to me at previous gatherings, took an actual step backward as if seeing me for the first time, but it was Rebecca's reaction that dominated the moment. Her face had cycled through a rapid progression of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a dawning horror, as the full implications of what she had just done began to sink in. She had publicly humiliated someone she believed to be beneath her family's station, only to discover that she had been attacking one of the city's most respected pediatric surgeons. "That's impossible," she stammered, looking frantically between Thomas and me. "She works nights. She's always tired. She spends her time in the basement with books and computers. Surgeons don't, they're not." "Rebecca." Thomas's voice cut through her rambling with quiet authority. "Dr. Chen performs brain surgery on children, emergency surgeries that can last 16 hours. She works nights because that's when medical emergencies happen. She's tired because she saves kids' lives for a living." Marcus had finally reached us, pushing through the crowd with an expression of growing alarm as he realized what was happening. "What's going on here?" he demanded, looking between his sister's ashen face and Thomas's grim expression. "Your wife," Thomas said carefully, "has just publicly called Dr. Chen a basement dweller who contributes nothing meaningful to society." The color drained from Marcus's face as he turned to look at Rebecca. "You did what?" But Rebecca was still struggling to process the revelation, her mind clearly racing to reconcile her assumptions with this new information. "If she's really a surgeon," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge, "then why hasn't she ever said so? Why all the secrecy? Why the vague answers about healthcare?" It was a fair question, and one that deserved an honest answer. I took a deep breath, aware that every person on the terrace was hanging on my next words. "Patient confidentiality," I said simply. "When you're a pediatric neurosurgeon, you can't casually mention your work at social gatherings. Every case I handle involves a child whose family is going through the worst experience of their lives. I don't talk about removing brain tumors from 6-year-olds over cocktails." The weight of this explanation settled over the crowd like a physical presence. Several people looked genuinely ashamed as they realized they had been treating someone whose daily work involved life-and-death decisions for children with polite condescension. David Crawford, Marcus's father, stepped forward from where he had been watching the exchange with growing mortification. "Dr. Chen," he said formally, "I owe you a profound apology, we all do. Your discretion about your profession shows exactly the kind of integrity that should be respected, not questioned." But Rebecca wasn't finished. The revelation had clearly shaken her, but it had also triggered a defensive response that was making her dig deeper into her position rather than retreat from it. "Fine," she said, her voice regaining some of its earlier sharpness. "So you're a surgeon. That still doesn't explain why you're so antisocial. Why do you miss family events? Why can't you be bothered to participate in normal conversations? Because, Thomas interjected before I could respond, his voice carrying a note of exasperation with his wife. She's usually operating on children or recovering from operating on children. Do you have any idea what it takes to perform brain surgery on a 7-year-old? The specific detail seemed to hit Rebecca like a physical blow. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked uncertain, as if the reality of what my work actually involved was beginning to penetrate her anger. Marcus stepped closer to me, his hand finding mine in a gesture of support that felt desperately needed. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "Sarah was in surgery all night before this party. She saved a child's life and then flew here to be with our family. She's been doing this for 3 years, and you've never once asked her about the specific nature of her work." "She never offered to explain," Rebecca shot back, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Because," said a new voice from the edge of the crowd, "good doctors don't use their profession as a social credential." Everyone turned to see Dr. Patricia Williams, a family friend and retired oncologist who had been quietly observing the exchange. She stepped forward with the authority of someone who had spent 40 years in medicine. "I've known Dr. Chen's reputation for several years," she continued, addressing the gathered crowd but keeping her gaze fixed on Rebecca. "She's one of the most skilled pediatric neurosurgeons on the West Coast, the kind of surgeon that other doctors call when their own children need brain surgery." The impact of this endorsement from a respected family friend was immediate and profound. Several people in the crowd actually moved closer to me, as if proximity to someone who could perform such miraculous work was somehow desirable. Thomas seized on Dr. Williams's intervention to drive home the point his wife seemed unable to grasp. "Rebecca, 3 months ago when the Henderson family's daughter needed emergency brain surgery after her riding accident, guess who they called? Dr. Chen operated on that little girl for 14 hours straight and saved her life. Emma Henderson is back in school today because of Sarah." I remembered the case he was referencing, 8-year-old Emma who had suffered a traumatic brain injury when she fell from her horse during a riding lesson. The surgery had been incredibly complex, requiring microsurgical techniques to repair damaged blood vessels while avoiding critical areas of the brain responsible for speech and motor function. It had been one of the most challenging operations of my career. But Emma had recovered completely. What I hadn't realized was that Thomas knew the Henderson family personally. His expression suggested that he had been aware of my role in Emma's recovery for months, which explained his growing discomfort with his wife's treatment of me. Rebecca's face had gone pale as the full weight of the situation began to settle on her. She was beginning to understand that she hadn't just attacked a stranger or even a distant family member, she had publicly humiliated someone who was widely respected in the medical community and whose work touched the lives of families throughout the Bay Area. "The basement," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I found you in the basement with all those books and computers, I was preparing for Emma's surgery," I confirmed gently. "Reviewing anatomical models, consulting with specialists in Boston and London, studying similar cases. Pediatric neurosurgery requires extensive preparation for each operation." The silence that followed this explanation was different from the earlier shocked quiet. This silence carried the weight of understanding, of recognition that what Rebecca had interpreted as antisocial behavior was actually the meticulous preparation required to save children's lives. Linda Crawford, Marcus's mother, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "we had no idea. All this time you've been carrying this enormous responsibility, and we've been treating your dedication as if it were a character flaw." It was then that the full scope of the evening's revelation began to sink in for everyone present. The quiet woman they had politely tolerated for 3 years wasn't just a doctor. She was someone who held children's lives in her hands on a regular basis. Every missed family dinner, every early departure, every tired appearance had been the result of work that most people couldn't even imagine performing. Marcus turned to his sister with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and genuine anger. "Rebecca, do you understand what you've done here? You've spent 3 years treating my wife like she was beneath our family's notice, when she's actually one of the most accomplished people any of us will ever meet." But Rebecca was still struggling with the cognitive dissonance between her assumptions and the reality she was being forced to confront. "She could have corrected me," she said weakly. "She could have explained." Why should she have to? The question came from Thomas, and his tone suggested that his patience with his wife's position was completely exhausted. Why should Dr. Chen have to justify her career choices to you? Why should she have to prove her worth to be accepted by this family? The crowd around us had grown larger as word of the confrontation spread through the party. Guests who had been mingling on other parts of the terrace had drifted over, drawn by the unmistakable tension and the increasingly raised voices. What had begun as a private family dispute was rapidly becoming the central drama of the anniversary celebration. Dr. Williams stepped forward again, her professional demeanor commanding attention. "I think there's something else this family should understand about Dr. Chen's work," she said, addressing David and Linda directly. "Pediatric neurosurgery isn't just technically demanding, it's emotionally devastating. Sarah spends her days working with families who are facing every parent's worst nightmare. The fact that she can compartmentalize that trauma and still be present for family gatherings shows remarkable strength." This perspective seemed to hit several family members with particular force. Jennifer, who had children of her own, actually pressed her hand to her mouth as if the full implications of my work were just becoming clear to her. "Every case," Dr. Williams continued, "involves a child whose future hangs in the balance. Every surgery could mean the difference between a normal life and permanent disability, or between life and death. The psychological pressure is extraordinary." Rebecca's expression had shifted again, this time towards something that might have been the beginning of understanding. For the first time since the confrontation began, she seemed to be considering the actual nature of my work rather than defending her assumptions about it. "I didn't know," she said finally, her voice small and uncertain. I assumed." "You assumed," Marcus said sharply, "that because Sarah didn't brag about her accomplishments, she didn't have any. You assumed that because she prioritized her patients' privacy over social performance, she was somehow lesser than the rest of us." The harsh truth of this assessment hung in the air between them. Rebecca had indeed made assumptions based on her own values and priorities, never considering that someone might approach social interaction from a completely different perspective. Thomas looked around at the gathered crowd, then back at his wife. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "Dr. Chen has probably saved more lives in the past year than most people save in a lifetime. While you've been worried about social appearances, she's been preventing children from dying." The stark comparison was brutal but accurate, and its impact on Rebecca was visible. She seemed to physically shrink as the full weight of her misjudgment became undeniable. It was then that something unexpected happened. From the back of the gathered crowd, someone began to applaud. Slowly others joined in, until the entire terrace was filled with the sound of appreciation for work that most of them were only now beginning to understand. Rebecca stood in the center of this applause, looking completely lost as the family she had sought to protect from my supposed unworthiness instead celebrated my actual contributions to society. The sound of their recognition was simultaneously gratifying and deeply uncomfortable. I had never sought this kind of public acknowledgement, and receiving it under these circumstances felt bittersweet. As the applause died down, Rebecca finally looked directly at me for the first time since Thomas's revelation. Her expression was complex: embarrassment, confusion, and perhaps the first glimmer of genuine respect. "I need to apologize," she said, her voice barely audible over the murmur of conversations beginning to resume around us. But before she could continue, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The ringtone was distinctive and urgent, and I recognized it immediately. It was the same priority notification sound I used for hospital emergencies. Rebecca glanced at her phone, then looked up at me with confusion. "It's Children's Hospital," she said. "They're asking for Dr. Chen." The phone buzzed again in Rebecca's trembling hand, its insistent tone cutting through the murmur of conversations that had begun to resume around us. I recognized the caller ID immediately. Dr. Martinez, the chief of emergency medicine at Children's Hospital. He wouldn't be calling unless it was critical. "May I?" I asked, extending my hand toward Rebecca's phone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present that the woman who had just been publicly dismissed as a basement dweller was now being urgently sought by one of San Francisco's premier medical institutions. Rebecca handed me the phone wordlessly, her face still pale with the shock of the evening's revelations. The gathered crowd had fallen silent again, sensing that whatever was about to unfold would further illuminate the reality of my profession. "Chen speaking," I answered, automatically shifting into the focused, professional tone that hospital emergencies demanded. "Sarah, thank God we reached you." Dr. Martinez's voice was tense with urgency. "We have a situation here that requires your immediate expertise. A 12-year-old boy was brought in 20 minutes ago with a traumatic brain injury from a skateboarding accident. The initial scans show massive swelling and what appears to be an arteriovenous malformation that was likely pre-existing but has now ruptured due to the trauma. I felt my body automatically shift into emergency mode, the exhaustion from my previous surgery instantly replaced by sharp clinical focus. Around me, the family gathering faded into background noise as my mind began processing the medical scenario Dr. Martinez was describing. "What's his Glasgow coma scale?" I asked, walking away from the crowd toward a quieter area of the terrace where I could concentrate fully on the conversation. "Initially a 7, but he's deteriorating rapidly. We've got him intubated and are trying to manage the intracranial pressure. But Sarah, this is beyond our emergency capabilities. Dr. Harrison is off call with the flu, and Dr. Kim is in surgery with another case that's going to run for hours." The gravity of the situation crystallized immediately. A 12-year-old boy was dying, and I was currently his best hope for survival. The distance between Napa Valley and San Francisco, normally a pleasant hour-and-a-half drive through wine country, suddenly felt insurmountable. "Can you get me helicopter transport?" I asked, already calculating timing and logistics in my head. "I can be at the Napa County Airport in 15 minutes if you can arrange an immediate airlift." Already in motion, Dr. Martinez confirmed. "The helicopter is lifting off now." "Sarah, there's something else you should know. The family specifically requested you." "The boy's name is Tyler Morrison." My blood ran cold. Morrison. I turned to look back at the crowd where Thomas Morrison stood next to his wife, both of them watching me with growing concern as they witnessed the intensity of my phone conversation. "Thomas Morrison's nephew?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "His brother's son from Portland. They drove down for a family vacation and were planning to visit Thomas this weekend. The parents are en route, but they specifically asked for you to handle the surgery. They said Thomas recommended you highly after what you did for the Henderson girl." The convergence of personal and professional circumstances was staggering. The same man whose wife had just finished publicly attacking my character had been quietly recommending my surgical skills to his own family members. The ethical and emotional complexity of the situation was overwhelming, but there was no time to process it. A child's life hung in the balance. "I'll be ready for pickup," I told Dr. Martinez. "Have the OR prepped for immediate craniotomy, and get me the detailed scans sent to my tablet so I can review them during transport." "Already done. Sarah, the parents specifically said to tell you that Tyler is their only child." The weight of that information settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. Only child. Every pediatric neurosurgeon knew that those two words carried implications beyond medical terminology. They meant that this surgery would either preserve a family's entire future or destroy it completely. I ended the call and turned back toward the gathered crowd, where Thomas Morrison was pushing through the circle of family members with an expression of growing alarm. He had clearly recognized his own surname in my conversation and was approaching with the frantic energy of someone who feared the worst. "Dr. Chen," he called out as he reached me. "Was that about Tyler? My nephew Tyler?" The sudden shift in his tone was remarkable. Gone was any trace of social formality or family politics. This was an uncle desperate for information about a child he loved, speaking to the one person who might be able to save that child's life. "Yes," I confirmed gently. "Tyler was in a skateboarding accident. He has a serious brain injury that requires immediate surgery." Thomas's face crumpled with anguish. Oh God. My brother Jake was so excited about this trip. Tyler just turned 12 last month. He's been skateboarding since he was 8, never had a serious accident before. Rebecca had approached during this exchange, her earlier hostility completely forgotten in the face of a family crisis. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. I looked at both of them, these people who had been part of a social drama just minutes earlier and were now confronting the reality of childhood mortality. "I'm going to do everything I can," I said, honestly. "The injury is serious, but it's operable. I need to get to the hospital immediately." Marcus appeared at my side, having overheard enough of the conversation to understand the situation. "What do you need?" he asked simply. "Transportation to Napa County Airport. There's a helicopter en route." "I'll drive you," he said immediately, then turned to address the crowd that had been following our conversation with rapt attention. "The party is over. Dr. Chen needs to get to the hospital to save a child's life." The speed with which the family gathering dissolved was remarkable. Guests began making immediate arrangements to leave. understanding instinctively that the evening's entertainment had been replaced by something far more serious. David and Linda Crawford approached to offer any assistance they could provide, their earlier mortification at Rebecca's behavior now overshadowed by concern for a child they had never met. But it was Rebecca's reaction that surprised me most. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, she grabbed my arm with surprising urgency. "Dr. Chen," she said, using my professional title for the first time, he's a special kid. He wants to be a marine biologist. He's obsessed with sharks and ocean conservation. His parents have been saving for years to take him to Australia to see the Great Barrier Reef." The personal details she was sharing revealed something important. Rebecca wasn't just concerned about a generic family crisis, she genuinely cared about this specific child and wanted me to understand his value beyond medical statistics. "I'll remember that," I assured her. "It helps to know who I'm fighting for." Thomas stepped forward, his expression intense with gratitude and desperation. "Dr. Chen, I need you to know when I recommended you to Jake and Laura, I told them you were the best pediatric neurosurgeon in California. I've been following your career since the Henderson case. I knew exactly who you were. Even when my wife," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The revelation that Thomas had been aware of my professional reputation all along added another layer of complexity to the evening's events. He had allowed his wife to publicly attack someone he knew to be extraordinarily accomplished in her field, presumably out of loyalty to Rebecca or reluctance to contradict her in public. "We can discuss that later," I said diplomatically. "Right now, Tyler needs me to focus entirely on his surgery." As Marcus and I headed toward his car, Rebecca called out one more time, "Dr. Chen, please save him. His parents can't lose their only child. They just can't." The desperation in her voice was genuine and heartbreaking. Whatever personal conflicts had dominated the evening's earlier drama, they now seemed insignificant compared to the life-and-death urgency of Tyler's situation. The drive to Napa County Airport was tense and focused. Marcus navigated the winding roads with careful speed, while I reviewed Tyler's medical scans on my tablet, the helicopter's medical team having uploaded them during their flight. The images were sobering: significant brain swelling and a ruptured arteriovenous malformation that was causing dangerous bleeding into the surrounding tissue. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked quietly, glancing at the scan images reflected on my screen. "Serious but operable," I replied, studying the anatomical details. "The malformation is in a tricky location near the motor cortex, but it's accessible. The main challenge will be controlling the bleeding while preserving brain function." Marcus nodded, understanding that I was processing the case aloud to help organize my surgical approach. After 3 years of marriage, he had learned to recognize when I needed to verbalize medical complexities as part of my preparation process. "What you did back there," he said as we neared the airport, walking away from the family drama to focus on saving a child's life, "that's exactly why I fell in love with you." His words carried particular weight given the evening's revelations about how his family had perceived me. For 3 years, they had interpreted my professional dedication as social inadequacy, never understanding that my apparent detachment from family politics stemmed from a deeper commitment to medical ethics and patient care. The helicopter was already waiting when we arrived at the airport, its rotors spinning and medical equipment visible through the open cabin door. The flight crew moved with practiced efficiency, helping me aboard and ensuring I had everything needed for surgical preparation during the flight. As the helicopter lifted off, I could see the Crawford estate below, its elegant terraces and perfect landscaping gradually shrinking into a collection of lights against the dark vineyard landscape. The party that had seemed so important just an hour earlier now felt like something from another lifetime, completely overshadowed by the medical crisis that demanded my immediate attention. During the flight, I continued reviewing Tyler's case while receiving updates from the hospital. His condition was stabilizing slightly thanks to medications designed to reduce brain swelling, but the surgery remained urgently necessary. Dr. Renaptikens confirmed that Tyler's parents had arrived and were waiting anxiously for my assessment. "Dr. Chen," the flight medic said as we approached San Francisco, "I wanted you to know, I've worked with a lot of surgeons over the years, and I've never seen anyone handle pediatric cases with your level of skill and compassion. That kid is lucky you're the one operating on him." The comment was meant as encouragement, but it also highlighted the enormous responsibility I was carrying. Tyler Morrison, a 12-year-old boy who dreamed of marine biology and had never met me, was depending on my ability to navigate through millimeters of brain tissue without causing permanent damage to his motor functions, speech, or cognitive abilities. As the helicopter touched down on the hospital's landing pad, I could see the emergency team waiting with a transport stretcher. The familiar environment of Children's Hospital surrounded me like a protective embrace. This was my domain, the place where social politics and family drama dissolved into the pure focus required to save young lives. But even as I prepared to enter surgery mode completely, I couldn't forget Rebecca's desperate plea, "Please save him. His parents can't lose their only child." The woman who had attacked me just hours earlier was now depending on my skills to preserve her family's future. The irony was profound, but it was also irrelevant. Tyler Morrison needed surgery, and I was going to give him the best chance possible for a full recovery, regardless of any personal conflicts with his family members. As I entered the hospital, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was simple but powerful. "Thank you for caring about our Tyler. We know you'll do everything possible. Jake and Laura Morrison." Tyler's parents had taken the time to reach out personally, even in their moment of crisis. Their trust and gratitude felt both humbling and motivating, as I prepared to scrub in for what would likely be one of the most technically challenging surgeries of my career. The basement dweller was about to perform brain surgery on a child whose life hung in the balance, while his aunt, who had called me antisocial and worthless, waited anxiously for news of whether her nephew would survive the night. The operating room at Children's Hospital felt like coming home after the surreal drama of the evening. Under the brilliant white lights, surrounded by the familiar hum of life support equipment and the quiet efficiency of my surgical team, the social complications of the Crawford family gathering faded into irrelevance. Here, in this sterile environment where millimeters mattered and seconds could determine a child's future, I was exactly where I belonged. Tyler Morrison lay on the operating table, his 12-year-old body looking impossibly small beneath the surgical drapes. The anesthesia team had him stable, but the monitors showed the concerning signs I had expected from reviewing his scans. Elevated intracranial pressure and irregular brain activity patterns that indicated the arteriovenous malformation was continuing to bleed into surrounding tissue. Dr. Chen, called Lisa Patel, my lead surgical nurse who had worked with me for over 5 years. "Tyler's parents are in the family waiting room. They specifically asked me to tell you that they're grateful you're here, and they trust you completely." The weight of that trust settled on my shoulders as I completed my surgical scrub. Jake and Laura Morrison had driven 3 hours through the night, racing to reach their only child, and they were now placing his life entirely in my hands. The fact that they were related to Rebecca, who had spent the evening questioning my competence, added a bitter irony to the situation. "What's our timeline looking like?" I asked Dr. Kevin Santos, the anesthesiologist who would be monitoring Tyler throughout the procedure. "His vitals are holding steady, but the ICP readings are climbing," he reported, referring to the intracranial pressure measurements. "We've got maybe a 2-hour window before the swelling becomes critical. 2 hours to navigate through some of the most delicate tissue in the human body, locate a ruptured blood vessel malformation, and repair it without damaging the motor cortex that controlled Tyler's ability to move, speak, and function normally." It was the kind of surgery that separated pediatric neurosurgeons from general practitioners. Technically demanding, emotionally intense, and absolutely unforgiving of even minor mistakes. "Let's begin," I announced, taking my position at the operating table. Scalpel. The initial incision revealed the severity of Tyler's injury more clearly than any scan could convey. The skull fracture from his skateboarding accident had created pressure that exacerbated the bleeding from his pre-existing arteriovenous malformation. What should have been a manageable condition had become a life-threatening emergency requiring immediate intervention. "There's more bleeding than the scans indicated," observed Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the resident who was assisting with the surgery. "The malformation appears to have multiple feeding vessels." I studied the exposed brain tissue through my surgical microscope, identifying the complex network of abnormal blood vessels that characterized Tyler's condition. Arteriovenous malformations were congenital abnormalities where arteries and veins connected directly without the normal intervening capillaries, creating a high-pressure system that was prone to rupture. "We're looking at a grade 3 malformation," I announced for the benefit of the surgical team and the recording system that documented all procedures. "Multiple feeding arteries from both the anterior and middle cerebral artery systems, with venous drainage into the superior sagittal sinus." The technical classification might have sounded routine to an outside observer, but everyone in the operating room understood its implications. Grade 3 malformations were among the most challenging to repair surgically, requiring precise identification and closure of multiple blood vessels while preserving normal brain function. Dr. Chen called the circulating nurse. "I have Dr. Martinez on the phone. Tyler's parents are asking for an update. Tell them we've begun the procedure, and everything is proceeding as expected." I replied, my attention focused entirely on the delicate work of identifying the malformation's boundaries. Estimated surgical time is 4 to 6 hours, and will provide updates every 2 hours. As I worked to isolate the first of the feeding arteries, my mind automatically processed the technical challenges ahead. The malformation was located dangerously close to Tyler's motor cortex, the brain region responsible for voluntary movement. Any damage to this area could leave him with permanent paralysis on one side of his body, drastically altering his future prospects. Micro-Doppler probe, I requested, needing to use ultrasound technology to map the blood flow patterns within the malformation. The probe would help me identify which vessels were essential for normal brain function and which were part of the abnormal malformation that needed to be eliminated. The Doppler readings confirmed my visual assessment. Tyler's malformation was indeed complex, with at least 6 major feeding vessels and a drainage pattern that involved critical venous structures. Each vessel would need to be carefully evaluated before closure to ensure I wasn't interrupting blood flow to healthy brain tissue. "Heart rate is climbing slightly," reported Dr. Santos from his position at the anesthesia station. "Blood pressure remains stable, but I'm seeing some irregular patterns in the EEG." The electroencephalogram monitored Tyler's brain activity throughout the surgery, providing real-time feedback about how the procedure was affecting his neurological function. Irregular patterns could indicate that my surgical manipulation was causing stress to surrounding brain tissue. "Let's pause for neurological monitoring," I announced, temporarily stopping the dissection to allow Tyler's brain activity to stabilize. "Run a full motor-evoked potential test." Dr. Walsh activated the neurological monitoring system that would stimulate Tyler's motor cortex with small electrical impulses while measuring the responses in his arms and legs. This technology allowed us to verify that the motor pathways remained intact throughout the surgery, providing early warning if any of our interventions threatened his ability to move normally. "All motor responses are within normal parameters," reported the neurological technician. "No degradation in signal strength or response time." The reassuring news allowed me to continue with confidence, knowing that Tyler's motor function remained uncompromised despite the proximity of my work to his motor cortex. I resumed the careful dissection of the malformation, using microscopic instruments to separate abnormal blood vessels from healthy brain tissue. "First feeding artery identified and ready for closure," I announced after 30 minutes of painstaking work. "This appears to be coming from the middle cerebral artery system." The closure of each feeding artery required extreme precision. Too much thermal energy from the cauterization could damage surrounding tissue, while inadequate closure could result in continued bleeding. I used bipolar electrocautery at the lowest effective settings, sealing the vessel with just enough energy to stop blood flow without creating unnecessary tissue damage. "Excellent hemostasis," observed Dr. Walsh as the first vessel closed cleanly. "No bleeding from the closure site. 1 down, at least 5 to go." Each successive vessel closure reduced the blood flow to Tyler's malformation, gradually transforming the high-pressure system that threatened his life into scar tissue that would pose no future danger. "Dr. Chen," the circulating nurse called softly, "Tyler's parents wanted me to tell you that he's been accepted to a summer marine biology program at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They said to mention that in case it helps you understand what you're fighting for." The personal detail hit me with unexpected emotional force. Tyler wasn't just a 12-year-old patient with a complex malformation. He was a boy with dreams of studying ocean life, someone who had earned admission to a competitive educational program that could shape his entire future. The surgery I was performing would determine whether he could pursue that dream or spend his life dealing with the consequences of brain injury. "Thank you," I replied quietly, refocusing on the delicate work of identifying the next feeding vessel. "That does help." As the surgery progressed, the complexity of Tyler's malformation became increasingly apparent. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward repair was revealing itself as one of the most challenging cases I had encountered in my career. The malformation had grown over Tyler's 12 years of life, creating intricate connections with normal brain vasculature that made each closure decision critically important. "We're 2 hours into the procedure," announced Dr. Santos. "Tyler's vitals remain stable, and all neurological monitoring continues to show normal function." The 2-hour mark represented a crucial milestone. Tyler had tolerated the initial phases of surgery well, suggesting that his young brain was resilient enough to handle the remaining interventions. However, the most technically demanding portions of the procedure still lay ahead. Next vessel appears to be the largest feeding artery, I observed, studying the blood flow patterns through my surgical microscope. This one is going to require temporary clips before we can achieve permanent closure. Temporary clips allowed me to stop blood flow to a vessel temporarily, while evaluating the effects on surrounding brain tissue. If Tyler's neurological monitoring showed any deterioration during the temporary occlusion, I would know that the vessel supplied critical brain regions and would need to be preserved rather than eliminated. Temporary clip in place, I announced. Run a full neurological assessment. For 60 seconds, Tyler's largest feeding artery was completely occluded while we monitored his brain function. The neurological technician ran through the complete battery of tests, motor responses, sensory pathways, and brainwave patterns, looking for any sign that the vessel closure would cause neurological damage. All parameters remain normal, came the reassuring report. No changes in motor, sensory, or cognitive monitoring. The successful test cleared the way for permanent closure of Tyler's largest feeding artery, a procedure that would dramatically reduce the blood flow sustaining his malformation. I removed the temporary clip and carefully positioned the bipolar cautery for definitive vessel sealing. Large feeding arteries successfully closed, I announced as the vessel sealed cleanly. Significant reduction in malformation blood flow observed. The operating room atmosphere remained focused but optimistic. Tyler was tolerating the surgery exceptionally well, and we were making steady progress toward complete malformation elimination. However, I knew from experience that pediatric neurosurgery could present unexpected challenges at any moment, requiring constant vigilance and preparation for complications. Dr. Chen, called Dr. Walsh, I'm seeing some unusual vessel architecture in the posterior region. This might be more complex than our preoperative imaging suggested. Her observation directed my attention to an area where the malformation appeared to connect with venous structures that drained blood from critical brain regions. These connections hadn't been clearly visible on Tyler's emergency scans, but direct surgical visualization revealed their presence and potential importance. Let's map this carefully, I replied, using the microdoppler probe to trace the flow patterns in the posterior vessels. We need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before making any closure decisions. The mapping process revealed both good news and challenges. The good news was that most of the posterior connections were indeed part of Tyler's abnormal malformation and could be safely eliminated. The challenge was that one vessel appeared to provide drainage for normal brain tissue, requiring a more complex surgical approach to preserve its function while eliminating the malformation. We're going to need to perform a bypass procedure, I announced after completing the vessel mapping. We'll create an alternative drainage pathway for the normal brain tissue before closing the malformed connection. Bypass procedures in pediatric neurosurgery required exceptional precision, essentially creating new blood vessel connections using microsurgical techniques. It was like performing vascular plumbing in an area where any mistake could result in stroke or permanent brain damage. Preparing microsurgical instruments for bypass procedure, responded Lisa, my surgical nurse, who anticipated my needs with the efficiency that came from years of collaboration. As I began the delicate work of creating Tyler's bypass, my phone vibrated with what I recognized as the distinctive pattern of a family emergency text. The timing couldn't have been worse. I was in the middle of the most technically demanding portion of Tyler's surgery, but the message might contain critical information about his condition or family situation. Lisa, can you check that message? I asked without looking away from the surgical field. She glanced at my phone and read aloud. Dr. Chen, this is Rebecca Morrison. I know you're in surgery with Tyler, but I needed you to know that his parents told us you're their only hope. Whatever happened tonight between us doesn't matter. Please save our boy. The whole family is praying for you both. The message from the woman who had called me a basement dweller just hours earlier carried an emotional weight that threatened to break through my surgical concentration. Rebecca Morrison was asking me to save the nephew she loved, trusting me with the most precious thing in her family's world, despite having spent the evening questioning my worth as a human being. Thank you, I replied simply, returning my full attention to Tyler's bypass procedure. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me, but it also wasn't relevant to the delicate work of preserving a 12-year-old boy's future. The bypass procedure required 45 minutes of microsurgical precision, connecting healthy brain tissue to alternative drainage pathways while preserving Tyler's normal neurological function. When it was complete, I could safely eliminate the final components of his malformation without risking stroke or other complications. Bypass is complete and functioning normally, I announced as blood flow resumed through the new pathway. We can now proceed with final malformation closure. The remaining procedures proceeded smoothly, with each vessel closure bringing Tyler closer to complete recovery. By the time I sealed the final abnormal connection, his malformation had been entirely eliminated while preserving all normal brain function. Surgery complete, I announced after 6 hours of concentrated work. Malformation successfully respected the preservation of all neurological function. Beginning closure. As I sutured Tyler's scalp closed, I felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction that followed successful pediatric neurosurgery. Another child would wake up with his future intact, able to pursue his dreams of marine biology without the shadow of potential brain hemorrhage hanging over his life. Tyler Morrison, the nephew of the woman who had called me antisocial and worthless, was going to be fine. The pediatric intensive care unit at Children's Hospital maintained a hushed atmosphere where hope and fear existed in delicate balance. Tyler Morrison lay in bed 7, his head wrapped in pristine white bandages, surrounded by monitors that beeped softly with the reassuring rhythm of stable vital signs. The 6-hour surgery had been successful, but the next 48 hours would determine whether he would wake up as the same bright 12-year-old who had been planning his marine biology adventure just days earlier. I stood at the nurse's station, completing Tyler's post-operative orders while keeping one eye on his room where his parents, Jake and Laura Morrison, maintained their vigil. They had barely left his bedside since arriving at the hospital, taking turns holding his hand and whispering encouragement that they hoped would reach him through the medicated haze of post-surgical recovery. Chen, called Maria Santos, the night shift charge nurse, Tyler's family is asking when they might expect him to wake up. It was the question every parent asked after pediatric brain surgery, and it never got easier to answer. While Tyler's surgery had been technically successful, each child's recovery timeline was unique, influenced by factors ranging from age and overall health to the specific location and extent of the surgical intervention. "Let me speak with them directly," I replied, finishing my documentation and heading toward Tyler's room. Jake Morrison looked up as I approached, his face haggard from worry and exhaustion. He was a tall man with gentle eyes that reminded me strongly of Marcus, though the family resemblance to Thomas was also evident in his facial structure. Laura sat beside Tyler's bed, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her nursing background evident in how she monitored his condition with professional awareness overlaying maternal concern. "Dr. Chen," Jake said, rising to shake my hand. "I can't begin to express our gratitude for what you've done. When Thomas called to tell us you were taking Tyler's case, I felt like we could finally breathe again. The irony of Thomas recommending me while his wife attacked my character wasn't lost on me, but this wasn't the time or place to address family politics. Tyler's surgery went very well," I assured them. "We were able to completely eliminate the malformation while preserving all normal brain function." Laura looked up with tears in her eyes. "When will we know if he was going to be okay? I mean, really okay?" Her question touched on every parent's deepest fear about pediatric brain surgery, that their child might survive the procedure but emerge fundamentally changed, their personality or abilities altered by necessary medical intervention. Tyler's neurological monitoring throughout the surgery showed completely normal function, I explained, pulling up a chair to sit at their eye level. All his motor responses, sensory pathways, and cognitive indicators remained stable during the entire procedure. That's an excellent prognostic sign. But when will he wake up? Jake pressed gently. Most children Tyler's age begin responding within 12 to 24 hours after this type of surgery, I replied honestly. However, every child is different, and Tyler's brain has been through significant trauma. The most important thing right now is that all his vital signs are stable, and his intracranial pressure has normalized. As if summoned by our conversation, Tyler's monitors began showing subtle changes, slight increases in heart rate and blood pressure that often preceded awakening. Laura noticed immediately, her nursing training alerting her to the significance of the pattern changes. "Is he waking up?" she whispered, leaning closer to her son's bedside. I moved to check Tyler's pupil responses and basic reflexes, noting encouraging signs of improving neurological function. "Tyler," I called softly, "can you hear me? You're in the hospital with your mom and dad. You're safe." Tyler's eyelids fluttered slightly, and his right hand moved in what appeared to be a purposeful motion. Laura gasped and immediately took his hand in both of hers. Tyler, sweetheart, it's Mom. Can you squeeze my hand? The responding squeeze was weak but unmistakable, causing both parents to burst into tears of relief. Jake called for the nurse while Laura continued speaking softly to Tyler, encouraging him to continue responding. Tyler, I said, using my pen light to check his visual tracking, can you follow the light with your eyes? His response was sluggish but appropriate, tracking the light movement with coordination that indicated his visual and motor systems were functioning normally. Each small response provided crucial information about his neurological recovery. These are all excellent signs, I told his parents as Tyler continued to show increasing awareness of his surroundings. His responses suggest that the surgery preserved all normal brain function. Over the next hour, Tyler gradually became more alert, progressing from basic responses to recognizing his parents and eventually attempting to speak. His first words were slurred from the lingering effects of anesthesia, but their content was perfectly coherent. Mom, he whispered, his voice barely audible, did I miss the aquarium program? Laura laughed through her tears, stroking his hair gently. No, sweetheart, you didn't miss anything. The program doesn't start for 6 weeks. You're going to be fine. The fact that Tyler's first concern was about his marine biology program rather than pain or confusion was an extraordinarily positive indicator. It suggested that his personality, memory, and priorities had remained intact through the surgical trauma. Tyler, I said, moving into his line of sight, I'm Dr. Chen. I performed your surgery. How are you feeling? He studied my face with the serious expression that seemed characteristic of him. My head hurts, he said honestly, but not as bad as I expected. Are you really the doctor who fixed my brain? I am, I confirmed, touched by his direct approach to the situation. Thank you, he said simply. My dad told me you were the best, and I guess he was right. The comment about his father's recommendation created an opening to address something that had been weighing on my mind throughout Tyler's recovery. Jake Morrison had praised my abilities to his brother Thomas, who had apparently been quietly recommending my services to family members even while his wife questioned my competence. Your Uncle Thomas spoke very highly of my work, I told Tyler. He's been very concerned about you. Tyler's expression brightened slightly. Uncle Tom and Aunt Rebecca are here? I thought they were at some fancy party. They left the party to come be with your family, Jake explained. They've been in the waiting room all night. The mention of Rebecca created a complex mix of emotions. The woman who had publicly dismissed me as a basement dweller had spent the night anxiously waiting for news about her nephew's surgery, trusting me to save the child she clearly loved despite her personal hostility toward me. Can I see them? Tyler asked, though his voice was growing tired from the effort of conversation. Let's wait until you've had a bit more rest, I suggested. Your brain needs time to recover from the surgery, and too much stimulation right now could cause unnecessary fatigue. As Tyler drifted back into therapeutic sleep, his parents remained at his bedside, finally able to relax slightly now that they had seen clear evidence of his neurological recovery. The next few days would involve careful monitoring and gradual return to normal activity, but the immediate crisis had passed. Dr. Twain, Laura said, as I prepared to check on other patients. Thomas told us about what happened at the party tonight, about his wife and the things she said to you. I paused, uncertain how to respond to this reference to the evening's social drama. We want you to know, Jake continued, that Thomas has been talking about your work for months. After what you did for the Henderson girl, he researched your background extensively. He told us you were not just a skilled surgeon, but someone who cared deeply about your patients' families. The revelation that Thomas had been actively following my career while allowing his wife to publicly attack my character created a complicated emotional landscape that I wasn't sure how to navigate. Thomas was in a difficult position, Laura said, apparently reading my thoughts. Rebecca has very strong opinions, and she doesn't change them easily, but tonight, watching her realize what she had done to you, seeing her genuine distress about Tyler, I think this experience might change her perspective. Before I could respond, my phone chimed with an incoming text message. The sender was Rebecca Morrison, and the message was longer than her previous communication during surgery. Dr. Chen, I know you're busy with Tyler, but I need to say something while I have the courage. I spent 3 years treating you terribly because I made assumptions about who you were and what you represented. Tonight, watching you save my nephew's life after the horrible things I said to you, I realize I've been wrong about everything. You've shown more grace and professionalism than I deserved. I hope someday you can forgive me. Tyler is going to grow up knowing that Dr. Sarah Chen saved his life, and I'm going to make sure our entire family understands what kind of person you really are." The message was unexpected in its vulnerability and self-awareness. Rebecca Morrison, who had built her identity around maintaining family status and social appearances, was acknowledging fundamental errors in judgment and expressing genuine remorse. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, noticing my expression as I read the message. "Your sister-in-law just sent me an apology," I said, showing them the text. Laura read it over and nodded thoughtfully. "Rebecca doesn't apologize easily. She's proud and stubborn, but she's not cruel. Tonight forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about her own behavior. She's been defensive about the family for years," Jake added. "Ever since Marcus married outside the wine country social circle, she's been worried about protecting the family reputation. I think she saw you as a threat to something she was trying to preserve." Their perspective helped me understand Rebecca's hostility in a broader context. She hadn't been attacking me personally so much as defending what she perceived as her family's interests against an outsider who didn't fit her expectations of appropriate Crawford family connections. "The irony," Laura continued, "is that you're exactly the kind of person the Crawford family should be proud to include. Someone who contributes meaningfully to society, who helps families in crisis, who demonstrates real integrity." As we talked, I noticed movement in the waiting area outside the ICU. Through the glass doors I could see Marcus pacing anxiously, checking his phone repeatedly as he waited for updates on Tyler's condition. Behind him, Thomas Morrison sat with his head in his hands, while Rebecca stood at the window looking toward Tyler's room with an expression of profound concern. "Would you like me to invite them in?" I asked Tyler's parents. Tyler briefly woke up and asked about his aunt and uncle. Jake and Laura exchanged glances before Jake nodded. Tyler loves his Uncle Tom, and despite everything, Rebecca has always been good to him. They should see that he's okay. I walked to the waiting area where the Crawford family had maintained their vigil throughout Tyler's surgery and recovery. Marcus immediately stood when he saw me approaching, his face searching mine for any indication of his nephew's condition. "Tyler is awake and responding normally," I announced, watching relief flood across all their faces. "The surgery was completely successful, and he's asking to see his aunt and uncle." Thomas's shoulders sagged with relief, and he actually began to cry. Quiet tears of gratitude and emotional release after hours of fearing the worst possible outcome. Rebecca stepped forward hesitantly, her usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "Dr. Chen, I don't know if I have the right to ask, but can I see him? I need to see that he's really okay." "His parents would like you to visit," I confirmed, "but just for a few minutes. Tyler needs rest to continue his recovery." As we walked toward Tyler's room, Rebecca spoke quietly. "I don't expect you to forgive me tonight," she said. "What I said was unforgivable, but I want you to know that watching you save Tyler has changed how I see everything." "Rebecca," I replied gently, "tonight isn't about forgiveness or apologies. It's about Tyler getting better and your family coming together to support him." When we entered Tyler's room, he was awake again, his eyes brightening when he saw his uncle and aunt. "Uncle Tom, Aunt Becca, did you really leave your party for me?" Thomas moved to Tyler's bedside immediately, taking his nephew's hand with visible emotion. "Of course we did, buddy. You're way more important than any party." Rebecca hung back slightly, her usual commanding presence subdued by the emotional weight of the situation. When Tyler looked at her expectantly, she approached his bed with uncharacteristic hesitance. "Hey, Tyler," she said softly, "how are you feeling?" "My head hurts, but Doc Chen says I'm going to be fine," Tyler replied with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often show in medical situations. "She fixed my brain so I can still go to the aquarium program." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as the full impact of what could have been lost hit her. "I'm so glad," she whispered. "I was so scared we might lose you." "Aunt Becca," Tyler said with concern, "why are you crying? Dr. Chen said I'm going to be okay." "I'm crying because I'm happy," Rebecca explained, wiping her eyes. "And because Dr. Chen is the most amazing doctor in the world for making you better." The transformation in Rebecca's attitude was complete and genuine. The woman who had spent the evening questioning my worth was now praising my abilities to the nephew whose life I had saved. As the family reunion continued around Tyler's bedside, I stepped back to observe the scene. The social drama that had dominated the Crawford anniversary celebration had been completely overshadowed by a medical emergency that revealed what truly mattered: family, love, and the precious nature of a child's life and future. Tyler would recover completely, able to pursue his dreams of marine biology without the shadow of brain malformation threatening his future. His family had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about judgment, assumptions, and the difference between social appearances and genuine worth. And Rebecca Morrison, who had called me a basement dweller, was now telling her nephew that I was the most amazing doctor in the world. The irony was profound, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a new understanding within the Crawford family about what really constituted value and worthiness. 3 days after Tyler's surgery, the morning sun streamed through the windows of his hospital room as he sat up in bed, enthusiastically explaining to a fascinated audience of nurses how great white sharks navigate using electroreception. His recovery had exceeded all expectations. Not only had he retained all neurological function, but his personality had emerged unchanged and perhaps even more vibrant than before the accident. The ampullae of Lorenzini are these gel-filled canals that detect electrical fields, Tyler was saying to Maria Santos, who had become his favorite nurse. They can sense the heartbeat of a fish hiding in the sand from like 3 feet away. I stood in the doorway observing this scene, marveling at how completely Tyler had bounced back from major brain surgery. His enthusiasm for marine biology had returned in full force, and he had been regaling anyone who would listen with detailed explanations of ocean predator behavior and conservation strategies. "Dr. Chen," Tyler called out when he spotted me. "I was just telling Maria about my research project on shark migration patterns. Did you know that some great whites travel over 12,000 miles in a single year?" "I didn't know that," I admitted, moving into the room to check his surgical site and review his latest neurological assessments. "It sounds like you're ready to get back to your studies." "When can I go home?" he asked eagerly. "I have 3 marine biology books I want to finish before the Monterey program starts, and I need to complete my application essay about conservation priorities in the Pacific." His cognitive function was clearly unimpaired. If anything, Tyler seemed more focused and determined than ever to pursue his academic interests. The brush with mortality had apparently strengthened rather than diminished his passion for learning. "If your scan results this morning are clear, you might be able to go home tomorrow," I told him, checking the healing progress of his incision. "Your brain needs a few more days to fully recover from the surgery, but everything looks excellent so far." As I completed Tyler's examination, Rebecca Morrison appeared in the doorway, carrying a large wrapped package and wearing an expression of nervous uncertainty. Over the past 3 days, she had visited Tyler daily, but her interactions with me had been awkward and stilted as she struggled to navigate the dramatic shift in our relationship dynamic. "Tyler," she said softly, "I brought you something." Tyler's face lit up as Rebecca entered the room. Despite the family drama that had preceded his accident, his relationship with his aunt had always been affectionate and uncomplicated. "What is it?" he asked excitedly as Rebecca placed the package on his bedside table. "Open it and see," she replied, but her gaze kept shifting toward me with an expression that suggested she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how to begin. Tyler tore into the wrapping with the enthusiasm of any 12-year-old, revealing a professional-grade underwater camera housing designed for marine research photography. His gasp of amazement was audible throughout the room. "Aunt Becca, this is incredible. This is the same kind of equipment they use at the Monterey Bay Research Institute." He examined the camera housing with reverent care. "But this must have cost, this is really expensive equipment." Rebecca's expression softened as she watched Tyler's reaction. "I thought you might want to document your own research when you start the summer program. Maybe you can photograph some of those sharks you're always talking about." The gift was clearly chosen with genuine understanding of Tyler's interests and ambitions. Rebecca had obviously researched marine biology equipment extensively to select something that would be both meaningful and professionally useful for his studies. "Dr. Chen," Tyler said suddenly, turning to me with excitement, "look at this camera. I bet I could get amazing footage of the feeding behaviors we talked about yesterday." The previous day, Tyler had asked me numerous questions about how brain function related to animal behavior, displaying the kind of scientific curiosity that suggested a bright future in marine research. Our conversations had ranged from shark neurology to the evolution of predator intelligence, with Tyler absorbing every detail with remarkable retention. "That's a beautiful camera, Tyler," I agreed, examining the professional equipment. "You'll be able to capture some incredible research footage with this." Rebecca stepped closer, her expression uncertain but determined. "Dr. Chen, could I speak with you privately for a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." Tyler was too absorbed in exploring his new camera to pay attention to adult conversations, giving Rebecca and me the opportunity to step into the hallway outside his room. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 3 days," Rebecca began, her usual confidence replaced by genuine vulnerability. "What I did to you at the party was inexcusable, but it was also revealing about my own character in ways that have been difficult to accept." I waited for her to continue, recognizing that this conversation represented something important for both of us. "Thomas has been trying to explain to me for months that I was wrong about you," she continued. "He told me about your work, about your reputation in the medical community, about the families you've helped. I dismissed everything he said because it didn't fit the narrative I had constructed about who you were and what you represented." Her honesty was surprising in its depth and self-awareness. The Rebecca Morrison I had known for 3 years had never displayed this level of introspection or willingness to acknowledge error. "I built my entire identity around protecting what I thought was the Crawford family legacy," she said, looking out the window toward the city beyond. "I saw you as a threat to that legacy because you didn't fit my expectations of who Marcus should marry. I never bothered to learn who you actually were." "What changed?" I asked gently, genuinely curious about her transformation. Rebecca was quiet for several moments before responding. "Watching you save Tyler's life while knowing what I had said to you earlier that night, it forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own values and priorities." She turned to face me directly. "You could have refused to operate on Tyler. You could have cited personal conflicts or recommended another surgeon. Instead, you dropped everything to save the nephew of someone who had just publicly humiliated you. That level of professionalism and integrity is something I've never encountered before." The admission was clearly difficult for her, but it also seemed to be providing some kind of emotional relief. Rebecca had apparently been carrying the weight of her misjudgment heavily over the past few days. "But it was more than just your professional behavior," she continued. "It was watching how Tyler responded to you, how his parents trusted you completely, how the entire hospital staff clearly respected and admired your work. I realized I had been completely wrong about everything." "Rebecca," I said carefully, "I appreciate your honesty, but you don't need to." "I do need to," she interrupted. "Because my behavior wasn't just wrong, it was harmful. For 3 years I've been treating you as if you were somehow lesser than our family, when in reality you're someone who contributes more to society than most people ever will." The conversation was interrupted by Tyler calling from his room. "Aunt Becca, Dr. Chen, come look at this." We returned to find Tyler had discovered additional features on his new camera, including underwater lighting systems and macro lens capabilities that had him practically vibrating with excitement. "With this equipment, I could document the feeding behaviors of deepwater species that have never been properly photographed," he announced. "This could actually contribute to real research." Rebecca smiled at his enthusiasm, but I noticed her expression also carried a note of sadness that I couldn't quite interpret. "Tyler," she said gently, "there's something else I wanted to talk to you about. Something about Dr. Chen and the way our family has treated her." Tyler looked up from his camera with confusion. "What do you mean? Dr. Chen is amazing. She saved my life." "She is amazing," Rebecca agreed, "but I haven't always treated her the way she deserved. I want you to understand that Dr. Chen is not just an incredible surgeon, she's also an incredible person who has been more gracious and forgiving than I had any right to expect." Tyler studied both of us with the perceptive awareness that many children possess about adult dynamics. "Did you two have a fight or something?" "Something like that," Rebecca replied carefully. "I said some things that were unfair and hurtful, and Dr. Chen handled it with more class than I deserved." "Did you apologize?" Tyler asked with the straightforward problem-solving approach of a 12-year-old. "I'm trying to," Rebecca said, glancing at me. "But some mistakes are bigger than simple apologies can fix." Tyler considered this seriously before responding. "Dr. Chen, are you still mad at Aunt Becca?" The question put me in an interesting position. Was I still angry about Rebecca's behavior? The honest answer was complex. I was disappointed by her assumptions and hurt by her public attack, but I also understood the family dynamics that had influenced her perspective. "I'm not angry," I told Tyler truthfully. "Your aunt and I had different ideas about some things, but we both care about your family, and that's what matters most." "Good," Tyler said with satisfaction, "because I want both of you to be friends. Dr. Chen is going to be my doctor forever, and Aunt Becca gives the best birthday presents." His innocent desire for family harmony was both touching and revealing. Tyler had unconsciously identified something important, that my role in his family's life was likely to be permanent, making it essential for Rebecca and me to find a way to coexist peacefully. "Tyler," I said, "your Aunt Rebecca chose an incredibly thoughtful gift for you. She clearly spent a lot of time researching exactly what kind of equipment would be most useful for your marine biology studies." Rebecca looked surprised by my acknowledgement of her thoughtfulness, but Tyler nodded enthusiastically. "She always knows exactly what I want," he confirmed. "Remember last year when she got me the complete set of marine identification guides, and the year before that when she found that rare book about deep-sea exploration?" The pattern Tyler described revealed something I hadn't known about Rebecca. She had apparently been supporting his academic interests for years, taking the time to understand his passions and find meaningful ways to encourage them. "You've been encouraging Tyler's education for a long time," I observed, looking at Rebecca with new appreciation. "Tyler is brilliant," Rebecca replied simply. "His interests might be different from traditional Crawford family pursuits, but his potential is unlimited. I've always wanted to support that." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Kevin Santos, who had been monitoring Tyler's recovery since surgery. He carried Tyler's latest brain scan results, which would determine whether he could be discharged the following day. "Good morning, Tyler," Dr. Santos said cheerfully. "Ready to see how your brain looks after Dr. Chen's excellent work?" Tyler sat up straighter with anticipation. "Is everything okay? Can I go home tomorrow?" Dr. Santos clipped the scan images to the light board in Tyler's room, revealing the clear, detailed pictures of his post-surgical brain anatomy. Even to my trained eye, the results were impressive. No residual bleeding, normal tissue appearance, and complete elimination of the arteriovenous malformation that had threatened his life. "Tyler," Dr. Santos announced with satisfaction, "your brain looks absolutely perfect. Dr. Chen's surgery was flawless, and your recovery has been remarkable." Tyler whooped with joy, and Rebecca actually applauded, a spontaneous expression of relief and gratitude that seemed to surprise her as much as anyone else. "Can I see the pictures?" Tyler asked eagerly. "I want to understand exactly what Dr. Chen fixed." Dr. Santos began explaining the scan images to Tyler, pointing out the surgical site and the areas where the malformation had been located. Tyler listened with intense concentration, asking detailed questions about brain anatomy and surgical techniques that impressed everyone present. "Tyler," Rebecca said softly as we watched him engage with the medical information, "you're going to do incredible things with your life. This experience, everything you've learned about medicine and surgery, it's all going to contribute to your understanding of biology and research." Her comment revealed something important about how the experience had affected her perspective. Rather than seeing Tyler's accident and surgery as purely traumatic, Rebecca was recognizing how it might actually contribute to his intellectual development and scientific curiosity. "Dr. Chen," Tyler said suddenly, "could I maybe visit your hospital sometime to see where you work? I mean, after I'm completely better. I want to understand more about neurosurgery and how it relates to marine biology research." The request was unexpected but touching. Tyler's interest in my work went beyond gratitude for his successful surgery. He was genuinely curious about the scientific principles and techniques involved. "I'd be happy to arrange a tour for you," I agreed. "We have some excellent educational programs for students interested in medical research." Rebecca watched this exchange with an expression of growing understanding. Over the course of a single conversation, she had witnessed Tyler's intellectual curiosity, my willingness to support his educational interests, and the natural mentorship dynamic that was developing between us. "Dr. Chen," Rebecca said quietly, "I think I'm beginning to understand what Marcus saw in you from the beginning, and what I was too stubborn to recognize." The comment represented perhaps the most significant acknowledgement she had made about her previous misjudgments. Rebecca Morrison was finally seeing past her own preconceptions to recognize the person I actually was, rather than the threat she had imagined me to be. As visiting hours came to an end and Rebecca prepared to leave, she turned back one final time. "Tyler gets discharged tomorrow?" she asked. "Assuming his afternoon neurological assessment goes well." "Yes," I confirmed. "Then I'll make sure his homecoming celebration includes proper recognition of the surgeon who made it possible," Rebecca said with a small smile. "It's time our family understood exactly who Dr. Sarah Chen really is." 2 weeks after Tyler's discharge from the hospital, the Crawford family estate looked remarkably different from the night of the anniversary celebration that had changed everything. Gone were the formal table settings and elaborate floral arrangements that had characterized that evening's careful social orchestration. Instead, The main terrace had been transformed into something warmer and more authentic. A genuine family gathering centered around celebrating Tyler's complete recovery and recognizing the relationships that truly mattered. Tyler himself was the centerpiece of the celebration, animated and energetic as he demonstrated his new underwater camera equipment to a fascinated audience of cousins and family friends. His surgical scar had healed beautifully, hidden beneath his hair, and his neurological function had returned to not just normal, but seemingly enhanced levels of focus and intellectual curiosity. The housing is rated for depths up to 200 feet. Tyler was explaining to his cousin Michael, who was home from college for the celebration. But the really amazing part is the macro lens system that lets you photograph the microscopic organisms that form the base of the marine food chain. I watched this scene from a quiet corner of the terrace, still somewhat amazed by how completely Tyler had bounced back from major brain surgery. His enthusiasm for marine biology had not only returned but seemed to have been intensified by his experience, as if his brush with mortality had clarified his sense of purpose and academic passion. Dr. Chen, called David Crawford, approaching with a warm smile that had become characteristic of his interactions with me since Tyler's surgery. "Thank you for coming today. I know Tyler specifically requested that you be here for his recovery celebration." The invitation had indeed come directly from Tyler, who had insisted that his brain doctor needed to be present for what he was calling his official return to marine biology research. His parents had enthusiastically supported the invitation, and even Rebecca had personally called to encourage my attendance. "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied honestly. "Tyler's recovery has been one of the most rewarding cases of my career." David's expression grew serious for a moment. "Sarah, I want you to know that this family owes you more than we can ever repay. Not just for saving Tyler's life, but for handling our family dynamics with such grace and professionalism." The reference to family dynamics was a diplomatic way of acknowledging the dramatic confrontation that had occurred at this same location just 2 weeks earlier. The contrast between that evening's social tensions and today's genuine warmth was remarkable. "Family dynamics are complicated," I replied diplomatically. "What matters is that Tyler is healthy, and everyone has come together to support his recovery." Before David could respond, Tyler himself bounded over with his characteristic post-surgery energy levels that seemed to exceed even his pre-accident enthusiasm. "Dr. Chen, did you see the new documentation system Aunt Rebecca helped me set up?" He gestured toward a sophisticated-looking laptop setup near his camera equipment. "I can upload underwater footage directly and analyze it using marine biology software." The mention of Rebecca's continued involvement in Tyler's education highlighted one of the most surprising developments of the past 2 weeks. Rather than retreating from her relationship with me after her public misjudgment, Rebecca had instead doubled down on supporting Tyler's interests while simultaneously working to understand and acknowledge my role in the family. "That sounds like an impressive research setup," I observed, genuinely impressed by the professional quality equipment Tyler had assembled. "Rebecca has been helping me design a summer research project," Tyler continued excitedly. "We're going to document feeding behaviors of local marine predators and submit our findings to the Monterey Bay Research Institute." The collaboration between Tyler and Rebecca on a serious academic project represented a significant evolution in how she approached supporting family members' interests. Rather than simply purchasing expensive gifts, she was now actively participating in Tyler's intellectual development. "Dr. Chen," said a familiar voice behind me, and I turned to see Rebecca approaching with an expression that was both confident and slightly nervous. She carried a wrapped package that was clearly intended for me. "Rebecca," I replied, noting that she looked different somehow, more relaxed and authentic than I had ever seen her during previous family gatherings. "I have something for you," she said, extending the package with an expression of hopeful uncertainty. "It's not adequate to express my gratitude for what you've done, but I wanted you to have something meaningful." I accepted the package with curiosity, unwrapping it to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal with my name and professional title embossed on the cover, Dr. Sarah Chen, Pediatric Neurosurgery. Inside the front cover was an inscription in Rebecca's elegant handwriting. "For the surgeon who saves children's futures and teaches families about real heroism." The gift was both thoughtful and symbolic, representing Rebecca's recognition of my professional identity in a way that explicitly honored rather than minimized my career achievements. "Rebecca, this is beautiful," I said sincerely. "Thank you. I wanted you to have something to document your cases and experiences," she explained. Tyler told me that you sometimes write about your surgeries to help process the emotional aspects of pediatric medicine. I thought this might be useful for that purpose. The fact that Tyler had shared details about my professional practices with Rebecca and that she had listened attentively enough to choose a gift that supported my work revealed a level of engagement and respect that would have been unimaginable just weeks earlier. There's something else, Rebecca continued, her voice taking on a more formal tone that suggested she was about to make an important announcement. I've been working with Tyler's parents on establishing a scholarship fund for students interested in marine biology and medical research. We'd like to name it in your honor. The proposal was completely unexpected and remarkably generous. Rebecca, that's incredibly thoughtful, but you don't need to. We want to, she interrupted gently. The Dr. Sarah Chen Foundation for Marine and Medical Sciences. Tyler helped design the mission statement. We want to support students who are passionate about understanding and protecting life, whether in the ocean or in the operating room. Tyler practically bounced with excitement at the mention of the foundation. Dr. Chen, it's going to fund research projects for high school and college students. Maybe I can get a grant for my shark migration study. The initiative represented something far more significant than a simple gesture of gratitude. Rebecca was creating a lasting institutional recognition of my work that would support future generations of students pursuing careers in science and medicine. I'm honored, I said, genuinely moved by the scope and thoughtfulness of the proposal. That's an incredible way to support young scientists. Marcus appeared at my side, having been circulating among family members and clearly pleased by the warmth with which everyone was now treating me. I see Rebecca told you about the foundation, he said with a proud smile. She's been working on it non-stop for the past week. It's the least we can do, Rebecca replied, but her expression suggested she didn't view it as an obligation so much as a genuine desire to create something meaningful. The conversation was interrupted by Jake Morrison, Tyler's father, who approached our group carrying what appeared to be a formal document. Dr. Chen, Jake said with a broad smile, Tyler has something he wants to present to you. Tyler immediately took the document from his father, his expression serious despite his obvious excitement. Dr. Chen, this is my official nomination letter recommending you for the California Medical Association's Pediatric Excellence Award. Dad helped me research the nomination process, but I wrote the whole thing myself. The nomination was both touching and surprising. That Tyler had taken the initiative to research medical awards and write a formal recommendation demonstrated remarkable maturity and genuine appreciation for my work. Tyler, that's incredibly thoughtful, I said, accepting the document. You didn't need to do this. Yes, I did, Tyler replied with the determined certainty that had characterized his personality since his recovery. You saved my life, and other people should know how amazing you are at helping kids. As I scanned Tyler's nomination letter, I was struck by both its technical accuracy and emotional sincerity. He had clearly researched my surgical techniques and patient outcomes extensively, presenting a compelling case for recognition that went far beyond personal gratitude. This is remarkably well written, Tyler, I observed. You've obviously put a lot of research into understanding pediatric neurosurgery. Aunt Rebecca helped me find medical journals and case studies, Tyler explained. She said if I was going to nominate you for an award, I needed to understand exactly why your work is so important. The collaboration between Tyler and Rebecca on researching my professional background represented yet another example of how dramatically her approach to our relationship had evolved. Rather than dismissing or minimizing my work, she was now actively studying and promoting it. Thomas Morrison joined our conversation circle, carrying 2 champagne flutes and wearing an expression of deep satisfaction. Dr. Chen, he said, offering me one of the glasses, I wanted to propose a toast. The terrace gradually quieted as Thomas raised his voice to address the entire gathering. 2 weeks ago, this family experienced both a crisis and a revelation. Tyler's accident forced us to confront what really matters, and Dr. Chen's extraordinary skill and dedication saved our nephew's life. He paused, looking around at the assembled family members before continuing. But Dr. Chen did more than perform successful surgery. She demonstrated the kind of integrity and professionalism that should inspire all of us. She showed us what it means to put service above personal comfort, competence above social positioning, and genuine caring above appearances. The toast was building toward something significant, and I could see that several family members were nodding in agreement with Thomas's assessment. Most importantly, Thomas continued, his gaze moving to Rebecca, Dr. showed us the grace to forgive misjudgments and the wisdom to focus on what truly matters when family needs support. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears as Thomas explicitly acknowledged her previous behavior and my response to it. The public recognition of both her mistakes and my professional conduct represented a complete reversal of the social dynamics that had characterized the anniversary celebration. To Dr. Sarah Chen, Thomas concluded, raising his glass, who reminds us all what it means to be truly worthy of respect. The toast was echoed throughout the gathering, with family members raising their glasses in genuine appreciation rather than social obligation. The warmth and sincerity of their recognition felt completely different from the polite tolerance that had characterized previous family interactions. As the toast concluded and conversations resumed, Rebecca approached me one final time with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with lingering regret. "Sarah," she said, using my first name for the first time in 3 years, "I need you to know that this experience has changed me, not just how I see you, but how I see myself and what I've been prioritizing in life." Her honesty continued to surprise me with its depth and self-awareness. "What do you mean?" "For years I've been focused on protecting what I thought was the Crawford family legacy. Our reputation, our social standing, our traditional way of doing things," she explained. "But watching you save Tyler's life made me realize that real legacy isn't about appearances or social positioning." She gestured toward Tyler, who was animatedly explaining marine photography techniques to a group of fascinated relatives. "Real legacy is about impact, about contributing something meaningful to the world, about supporting the next generation's potential to make things better." The transformation in Rebecca's perspective was remarkable and seemed to be genuinely permanent rather than a temporary emotional response to the crisis. "Tyler is going to grow up knowing that Dr. Sarah Chen saved his life and made his dreams possible," Rebecca continued. "That's the kind of legacy worth preserving and celebrating." As the celebration continued around us, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us from that confrontational evening 2 weeks earlier to this moment of genuine family acceptance and appreciation. Tyler's accident had been traumatic for everyone involved, but it had also catalyzed important changes in understanding and relationship dynamics that might never have occurred otherwise. "Dr. Chen," Tyler called from across the terrace, where he was setting up his camera equipment for a demonstration. "Come help me show everyone how the macro lens works." As I walked toward Tyler's enthusiastic group of relatives, I caught Marcus's eye across the terrace. He smiled and mouthed thank you, not just for saving his nephew's life, but for handling his family's complexities with patience and grace that had ultimately helped them all become better versions of themselves. The woman who had been called a basement dweller was now being celebrated as a family hero, but more importantly, she had helped transform a family's understanding of what truly constituted worth, contribution, and legacy. Tyler's recovery was complete, Rebecca's transformation was genuine, and the Crawford family had learned that sometimes the most valuable people are those who demonstrate their worth through quiet competence rather than loud self-promotion. As Tyler began his photography demonstration with infectious enthusiasm, surrounded by family members who now understood and appreciated both his dreams and the surgeon who had made them possible, I realized that some confrontations, however painful in the moment, can lead to profound understanding and authentic relationship building. The basement dweller had become the family's most respected member, not through social maneuvering or political positioning, but through the simple act of excelling at work that mattered, and treating others with dignity regardless of how she was treated in return. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the most painful truths. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.